Hey Elliot, how's it going?
Pretty good. How about you, Josh?
Oh man, not too bad. I guess I'm still trying to recover from a 2 week trip that I really didn't pay a whole lot of attention to our podcast here and really not maybe as prepared as I should be for a conversation. But we set a goal for ourselves about what's it been now, like 6 or 8 months ago, where we said we want to release these episodes weekly and we want to keep this thing rolling for at least a year. So here we are having a conversation. No more episodes that are kind of in the bag, as they say. And we got to get something out by the next couple of days.
Well, I wouldn't sell yourself too short, Josh. I mean, I think we have good conversations, even if it seems a little off the cuff. But yeah, no, looking forward to it.
Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of behind the scenes on the trip. So I went on a 2 week trip to Las Vegas. Most people would say, "Oh my God, that's that's ridiculous," because that's the response that I was getting quite frequently. The intention of the trip was to go see some concerts. So I wanted to see the band Def Leppard. I had never seen them before. Going back to my youth and like junior high, high school days, they were one of the bands that had all the hits that you were listening to in the junior high dance, that was awkward and you never could bring yourself to ask a girl to dance even though you wanted to so badly. At least that was my situation. I shouldn't be projecting that on everyone else. But those that was the soundtrack of my, like eighth grade, ninth grade dances. And it was a great concert. That was at the start of the trip. And then really, I guess the main reason anybody that knows my wife and I, they know that we travel to see the band 311. We're kind of like, I guess, pseudo groupies in a way. We have been all over the country, and it's just a fun way to, I guess, have an excuse to go to different places that we haven't been to before. We like to go to national parks, and we like to go to see the band play. And every other year they play in Las Vegas for 2 nights and have these long, like 3 or 4 hour sets where they play songs that they don't typically play on the just general like annual tours where they're coming into your local city. So this was her second time going. It was my first time going. That was on the tail end of the trip. So the time in between, we spent a lot of time hiking and outdoors and that kind of thing. So it wasn't we weren't going there for gambling and that kind of stuff. We were going there for concerts and then just to spend time in warmer outdoor weather.
You've ruined it. You weren't going there to put your net worth on black and see where the roulette wheel of destiny takes you.
We did a little bit of gambling. I won't say that we didn't do any, but it was very, very insignificant. My son Caleb joined us out there for part of the trip. He was really wanting to play roulette and blackjack, which neither of those things I had ever really played in, I guess, physical form or whatever the terminology is. So they have a lot of virtual or digital versions of that now. We started out with roulette. I put $5 down, and he's like, "Let's see if we can double this." And I think we started out with like $2 or $3, or $3. That's what it was. It was the minimum bet, and we hit whatever it was that we bet on and doubled the money. And he immediately cashed out and we had like $10. Took that to blackjack and played a couple of hands on that, and I guess 5x our money because we got up to or nearly 5x. We got to 23, and he cashed out. We were on a roll. I was feeling really good about it, and he cashed out. And he's like, we got to leave on a high note. So took that $23, carried it around with us for a couple of days as the ticket voucher, and then went back to that casino, put it in, and immediately it was gone within like 3 hands. We, just as fast as we accumulated it, we lost it.
The joys of casinos. I mean, they're totally built on the proposition of losing money, right?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know the algorithm or whatever it is that's behind the scenes for those, especially those virtual games. This isn't a dealer that's standing in front of you with blackjack. This is actually like playing more like on like the video poker kind of thing. And how, what is the sequencing of of however those cards come up. And of course, there's a little bit of, I guess, skill built in where you have to decide, okay, if I'm at 17 or 18 or something like that, do I go for, an attempt to get close to 21 or do I hold? But it's funny that how we won initially and it's like, oh, that gets you sucked in and hooked. And then it immediately, takes it right back.
That's right. They know what they're doing in Vegas for sure. But no, that's exciting to hear that you took, a trip in, well, first let me say I have so much consolation for you in recovering from your 2 week long trip. But of course, yeah, it's exciting to go see and do things that you enjoy, going to concerts and doing hiking and really living the life that you want to live. That's what FI is all about, is doing the things that you're passionate about and and having money not be a constraint for you. So that's exciting.
I wouldn't say that it's not a constraint. It certainly was an expensive trip. And we also went to the Sphere, saw a show there. We did some other things, just entertainment wise. And food is, whew, man. I took a glance at the credit card statement this morning and I was like, holy smokes. I knew it was racking up. And all we did really was is have dinner out. We rarely had any lunch, maybe once or twice for lunch, and then breakfasts were all at home at the place we were staying. So, yeah, I think it was nearly 2 grand just on dining out and drinks, and that's a big number. But it's over a 2 week period. I mean, I guess it's the majority of our entertainment.
Certainly, when you break that down over 2 weeks, still, I mean, it sounds large in totality, but when I think about what was what's my monthly budget here, I mean, now granted, of course, you're paying double charges when you've got expenses at home and you're traveling in addition, but yes,
Yeah,
cost of living in Vegas is certainly different than good old St. Louis, Missouri.
yeah, and it was five of us at times. We had our daughter met us out there, and then our son brought his girlfriend as well. So they were out there for a little more than half of the trip, and that added up pretty quickly. But I mean, it is what it is. It's not something that we do every. We may not even do something like this annually. We were kind of talking about that as we were kind of in the midst of the trip. A lot of conversations came up about because Lori's still working and just kind of her starting to think through like, okay, I'm 2 weeks having 2 weeks off here. This feels really good. I don't know if I want to go back to work. And she certainly wasn't looking forward to it. And then that kind of led into some other conversations about what does the future look like? And then maybe we were talking a little bit about what types of trips would we take and how frequently would we be able to take those? Because even though we try to do our best to, I guess, do the credit card hack, get points, do all those kinds of things for airfare, hotel stays. I mean, still entertainment, you can certainly do things that are free. We went hiking a lot. We went to see some conservation areas and national park and some state parks. Most of those were very low cost, but then there was still the cost of food and just other forms of entertainment that, not everybody wants to hike every day like me. And, those kind of things were quite expensive. And so like how often can we really realistically do that? Certainly not monthly, maybe not even annually, but those are the things that we're kind of starting to think about.
So that brings up a ton of questions on my side. So I know that you've spoken about this in our previous episodes of kind of being the anti-budget person. You guys don't have a real strict budget that you follow by any means, but as someone who's seen your numbers, I would push back a little bit and say, yeah, like I mean, you certainly have the net worth that you could accommodate these trips still and travel in your both of you being retired, both you and your wife. Now, of course, I think to your point, you need to set some constraints, right? Is you're not saying, hey, I'm going to go spend 2 grand every single month. That's an extra nearly 25 grand in your annual budget. And so if you can accommodate that, sure. But if that's not what your life looks like, then you got to realize, how much am I willing to increase? And to the same point, I think like Vicki Robin puts this in her book, Your Money, Your Life, very well, is that there are also expenses that come up just from working day in, day out. Now, I know Lori works much closer to your guys' home, so commuting expenses probably not so high. Things like attire or food in the office, like going out with coworkers or eating at a cafeteria, like things like that. I know personally, these are all things that I have in my own job that once I move to retirement, those things will no longer be costs. So there is, I would say, translation in your budget that allows some of these things where you're like, oh, well, we already spend X amount of dollars. If we were to add, travel, it just adds it onto what our existing spend is. But in many cases, I think it's not always quite so additive like we may think that it is.
Yeah, I'd say there's certainly an offset that would occur, but I don't know how to quantify that quite yet. We're just starting to look at our expenses on a monthly basis. We really just started that in January. We're here in middle of March, and I just looked at February. And yeah, you're right. I mean, there are some of those costs. One of them is that you didn't mention is there's always the office like birthday party or baby shower type thing or whatever that is still an expense. I don't know really to what extent that has been, but it certainly is something that I'm more aware of now that we're keeping a closer, or I'm keeping a closer eye on that, not necessarily looking at it. And we had this discussion quite a bit over the last couple of months is like, we just want to make sure, I want to make sure that we're looking at what it is that we're spending so that we have a better idea on it, not only from an audit standpoint, because let's get rid of those money leaks that we talked about a couple episodes ago. And the other one is just to really have a much better idea of what our life actually costs, because we have been maybe a little more loose. And then when start to look at it, you're like, oh, well, if I was really projecting that we spend $60,000 a year, and I was just taking a rough guess at that. Well, the first 2 months here alone, we've already spent $13,000 total. Extrapolate that over the course of the year, and we're going to be quite a bit, off that number, quite a bit higher than that number, and somewhere in the 80 to 90,000 range, which I would have been surprised. I still am, I guess, a little bit surprised that it was, that's the quantity that we're at. So we got to kind of like then start to think through it a little bit differently where, okay, what if I was thinking that if let's say my net worth was in the 1.5 range and I could pull out 60 from that with no problem. Well, now it's like, oh, okay, well, I got to be, I'm maybe a little bit closer to the high end of the 4% rule than I thought that I was, and maybe just even a slightly above that. So there's like some things that we're starting to think through as well too. And then it becomes maybe a little bit more of an exercise to make sure that we are living within some sort of guardrails or boundaries, and we're not, just spending without really paying too much attention to it, because that could potentially catch up to us. And, then we enter into the dreaded sequence of return risks situation.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, we've talked about this a number of times, especially recently in our episodes, is now the fact that I'm getting much closer to retirement. I think you and I are having a lot of the same discussions is, do the numbers actually check out? Do they actually make the 4% rule? is the fact that, I think it becomes very real for people, myself included, to say, okay, if I take these expenses and multiply them by 25, do I actually have that number in liquid net worth? For me, that is the measure of, yeah, hey, we're good or we're not good. Of course, I know you and I talked about this for probably 2 seconds before we hit record, but obviously the economy is doing its own cartwheels right now in the joy of going to war and how that impacts just overall stock prices and world events. So yeah, it's easy for, I think, anybody to kind of, want to be cautious and conservative about saying, okay, well, yeah, maybe I have the 4% right now, but we're in war, so the stock market just took a whatever percent drop. What's to prevent it from doing the same thing? And maybe it's going to be a closer to true bear market and have a true correction in the market. But at the same time, that's always the fear that people are saying, right? Is it's not a matter of if, but when these things are going to happen, and how are you going to react when those events eventually occur? Is, of course, sequence of returns risk is going to be more impactful at the beginning of your drawdown scenario. But like in your situation and my situation currently, is that we have income coming in, whether that's from ourselves or our spouses, whatever. That's a way to hedge against the sequence of returns risk. So while it is always scary, I think, to the FI community at large to just see, oh, the market's going down. If you're working, that's a great thing, because generally that means you're buying shares at a depressed price. And over the long term, I think the theory that we all believe in is that over time, the market is going to go up and to the right.
I have a question for you, though. It's more of on the psychology side of things. So let's pretend for a moment that you were, let's say that you're sitting here in the middle of March and you're like, and you've defined your finish date, whatever that may be. Some point in the future, though, it's down the road a little bit. Maybe it's 3 months, 6 months, whatever it might be. And we're in the situation where you know that you're spending, let's say you need to have $80,000 a year and spend. And that you are right at the edge, let's say, of the 4% rule. Maybe it's, somewhere within the plus or minus. So you're sitting on approximately $2 million in net worth. So you're right there where 4% rule is what you're what you would think you would need to cover those expenses in year one. What would it's just really hard to say not being in that situation, but let's say we see a 25% drop. So now we're at 1.5 in net worth. What would your thoughts be, do you think, as you sit here and you're like, okay, well, I could potentially keep working, or this is the date that I'm hanging my hat on. As we sit here right now, just kind of playing through that mental exercise, how do you think you would handle it? And would you, do anything to, would you continue working? Would you just say, I believe it's going to go up and to the right from here on out, and maybe we'll just adjust our expenses or whatever the case might be?
I mean, I mean, what you're saying is, let's just sit here and role play through a scenario. And honestly, what I would always encourage people to do is always go back to your investor policy statement. If you don't have one, you should create one.
Bet down. I need to create one,
Which
Elliot.
I was going to say, I am also guilty because I do not also have one either, because I am in the accumulation stage at this exact moment. However, I think what is important is to understand, and that's the reason that anybody practices anything, right? Is okay, all of a sudden you're in a unknown or uncomfortable scenario. How are you going to react? If you've practiced that, you're going to be more proficient in actually executing your strategy as opposed to reacting in the moment. And so once again, I haven't talked through this with Dawn or anything else, but I think at that scenario of, okay, we have a 25% drop over some period of time. I mean, I think this is another question is generally how, once I'm in a drawdown scenario, if we intend to draw our entire annual expenses at one point in time, or if we intend to do it monthly and just say, yeah, hey, I'm going to take this percent, or this amount of money on a monthly cadence, just like you would dollar cost averaging money into the market. It's essentially the reverse, right? But I think the way that I would play it out is that yes, I understand that this is a bear market. We're in a correction, but I'm going to continue to draw. Now, I'm not saying that we're not going to be smart about it and say, hey, maybe we have some more discretionary expenses in our budget. Maybe we decide to pull back on certain things to say, hey, does this really make sense to do some of these other things? And basically look at, are there ways to decrease our expenses? But I'm would be pretty hesitant to just turn around and just kind of have the knee-jerk reaction of saying, oh, like market took a 25% hit. I'm immediately going out and I'm trying to find work. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One thing you said in there, you were mentioning the withdrawal strategy and the like dollar cost averaging type of approach. And I've been reading the tax planning to and through early retirement with Sean Mullaney, Cody Garrett. And in there, one of their recommendations is that you pull from your retirement accounts on an annual basis. And it may have been a bit more specific to the 72T because I was reading, trying to really hone in on that and really understand the dynamics there. But they were suggesting from the standpoint of trying to minimize any kind of errors that you might make, especially if you're trying to pull a specific amount to try to stay within the your modified adjusted gross income range, whatever the case might be, or if you're trying to ensure that you're following the rules accurately, that you don't make a mistake that could cost you in a 10% early withdrawal penalty, things like that. They were suggesting that annual withdrawal, which kind of surprised me a little bit. And of course, everybody's situation is different and comfort level and things like that. I had never really given it a whole lot of thought. I guess for me, I kind of thought maybe along the same lines as you that I would probably do a monthly withdrawal of some sort once we got to that point so that it felt a little bit more like just a regular paycheck. Like you're just continuing to get paid monthly. But in seeing that, it kind of gave me a little bit of pause where it's like, oh yeah, maybe that does make a little bit more sense. And if I guess you could still kind of manage it in a similar fashion to where if if we were in that hypothetical situation and I knew that I wanted to have a similar lifestyle from a cost standpoint, that it would cost $80,000. If I did draw that down and then we were in a bear market and things were kind of going a little bit sideways and there's maybe it's an unknown as far as the length of time that that's going to be, then maybe throughout that year you start to go, okay, well, instead of spending whatever it is, $7,000 a month, I spend 5,000 or I pull back. And then you get to the end of the year and you have more money than you withdrew. And then the following year you withdraw perhaps less because if you have, let's say you have $20,000 left, then you perhaps withdraw $60,000 the next year. You still have that $80,000, but then you can choose, okay, am I going to go back up to that lifestyle because things have corrected, or am I going to continue to live a more conservative lifestyle and then potentially have the same situation happen, at the end of that year?
Yeah. No, I mean, 100%, I think maybe I'm just overly optimistic, but
That's
I
not like you,
think
Elliot. I'm kidding.
it's probably true. I mean, I think as much as we have researched and listened to other people and voices in the space, right? the 4% rule was designed to be a worst case scenario. Like, you look at how many different events happened during the research of the 4% rule, it is it is a large number of, I mean, we've got world wars, we've got the Great Depression, we've got stagflation, we've got coronavirus, we've got housing crisis, we've got all kinds of things that were huge negative repercussions on the market. But look where we are, just roaring along, the engine's still going down the track. And the most common response, I think, from people who have been doing this for a longer period of time has been, I wish I had done this sooner, is ultimately, and maybe that was some of them saying, yeah, I did one more year syndrome or whatever else, like trying to provide a cautionary tale to all of us to say, hey, like I did the more cautious approach, and I'm trying to steer you away from those, you know, rocks, so to speak. But I mean, I know that every one of us wants to be cautious, and we think that the biggest risk is us running out of money. But I know this is a drum that Jordan Grummett beats pretty hard, is the thing that we're all going to run out of eventually is time. And that is much more likely to happen than running out of money for people in this community. So I would operate from that point of view, that strength, knowing that you can always adjust. There's tons of people that talk about different approaches on adjusting. And I also know that many of us are super analytical. So you're not going to just march off the cliff of, oh, hey, I'm going to keep on drawing my 4% until 25 years down the line or 20 years down the line, I don't have any more money. I think that knowledge of saying, hey, we're going to continually look at our numbers and see, does this still make sense? Does this still get me to where I expect it to have to last to? Do I have other guardrails in place, etc., that passes the sleep well at night test? And if you still don't sleep well at night, then maybe the answer is that you will go back to work. And if that makes you feel better and you found something that fulfills you at the same time, nobody's saying you can't do that.
Yeah, one of the things that Lori and I were talking about on our trip, so I guess a couple of things to give some context is that a few weeks ago during one of our conversations, I mentioned that she was really pursuing the idea of working part-time, which was just going to cut down. She currently works 4 days a week. She was going to cut down to three. And there was still some questions that she had for her employer about what that looks like from a standpoint of benefits. And something that she found out and learned was that they were no longer going to be, if she dropped down to part-time, she would not earn paid time off. She would still have her health insurance. She would still have her 401k match. So, I mean, those are good things, but no paid holidays, no paid time off, vacation days, anything like that. And so we kind of like loosely ran the numbers and it was like, well, she potentially still has the same amount of time off because she earns a lot of sick time and then however many weeks of vacation time, plus you throw in all the holidays that she gets paid for. And it's almost equivalent to that one less day per week when you add it all up. So she's like, I don't really like that. I don't know that that's the right thing to do right now. So which I'm fine with. But then she started thinking about, okay, well, what if so instead of going from part-time, go to, just cutting all the way back. And we were kind of talking through that. And one of the questions she asked me is like, what do we need to look at? What do we need to think about if I were to end employment at the end of, let's say, the end of this year? The number one concern for us, as most people in the US, is healthcare insurance. And so I started something I haven't had to look at too much, and started digging into that over the last few days and learned that, and I'm probably not going to speak to this as clearly as other people would, but when it comes to the changes that were made at the end of 2025 with the removal or reduction in any kind of gradual decrease in the Affordable Care Act and the premiums and the subsidies that you would be eligible for, that went away with whatever was in place with that came along after COVID. So there's essentially a cliff now that as long as you qualify for under 4 times the poverty level, and which equates to about 84,000 and some odd number of dollars, you get full subsidies. If your adjusted modified adjusted gross income is above that, you don't get any subsidies. So I started playing around with that a little bit just to kind of get a sense of what would our healthcare cost us. And here in Missouri, and based on the coverage for the two of us, we were looking at bronze plans somewhere in the range of $1,000 a month with no subsidies. And then it would be about $350 to $400 if we did get the full subsidies, which that's not bad. I mean, I think Lori we pay about that much in health insurance now through her employer. So that's one aspect of it. And then the other thing though is then trying to wrap my head around, okay, how do I stay within that modified adjusted gross income? There's a couple things that I'm still trying to navigate through and understand because the majority of our money is in our 401ks. So it's in the tax deferred accounts. We do have some in a taxable account and a brokerage account, but it's probably only enough to maybe cover us for 2 years. We have a little bit of cash. Don't necessarily want to pull from that first because we look at that as the potential for a big expense or emergencies and things like that. And that wouldn't even be a year's worth at this point. And then the other thing is our rental income. So when you put all of those kind of like three things in the mix, we have to figure out if we want to stay somewhere. And our lifestyle shouldn't cost us more than like $80,000 a year. I say that kind of with uncertainty in my voice and in my tone because I'm starting to look at what the last few months have cost us, it's like, we might have a little bit more fun than that. And so I started trying to play around with that and understand like how realistic is it that we can stay within that, given that we have the rental income and what does that actually look like? And I don't know the answer to that yet. So it's still something that I need to continue to work through because when I look back at our taxes for 24 that we did in last year in 25, our adjusted gross income was over $200,000. So, but that was with me working. So that's a big difference that we're going to have there for this year. So it'll be interesting when we do our taxes. We haven't done our taxes yet for 2025 and to see what that number turns out to be. But those are the levers that we're going to have to figure out how to pull, or we make the decision that, hey, our spending is going to exceed that, our income is going to exceed that, so we're going to lose those subsidies.
Yeah, I think we have a whole episode just in that alone is that concept of staying within that 400% of the federal poverty level and what that actually looks like. But based off of even what you've said throughout this episode, right, is $13,000 in spend across January, February, and that is $6,500 a month. If you multiply that by 12, you get $78,000. If you take the 400% times the federal poverty level, that is actually, like you said, is $84,000. If you divide that by 12, it's $7,000. So now you've got your wiggle room of a whole $500 that, yeah, I mean, yes, you feel like you're towing the line, maybe that I'm sure it gives you anxiety, right? But that's the question is, yeah, I mean, it is a very material cliff now that if you make $84,001, you lose those $14,000 worth of subsidies from that. So I know that Choose FI just had a whole episode on that concept as well.
And there's a lot of that. Sometimes I'm hearing those conversations, and it's not because there's so much jargon that I'll kind of gloss over it, so to speak, and think, well, that's future Josh problem. But now I'm more in the mindset where I'm like, I gotta maybe start really learning some of this terminology and figuring some of this stuff out. And reading their book has helped, and I'm not reading it from start to finish. It's designed more like you can just kind of pick up in certain chapters that are applicable to you. So I'm really honing in on the 72T because I think that's probably going to be one of our main drawdown strategies in a combination with some other things. Now they kind of suggest that you exhaust your taxable account first. My concern with doing it strictly like that would be that if I lose that flexibility of if I just jumped into a 72T and didn't have anything else to rely on, and then was trying to really make sure that we stayed below that MAGI, modified adjusted gross income, because the the rental income is the piece that's a little bit of an uncertainty for me. I mean, when you put in all of your expenses and all of the things that are associated with owning rental properties, depreciation and things like that, you're ideally in the best case scenarios, you're operating at, you're not showing much of a profit. You're in some cases you're showing a loss. And I think that's where we've been, but I'm not sure that that's where we're going to stay for foreseeable future. And something that I really need to learn more about as we get closer to what that's going to look like for us and drawdown and what kind of thing. I mean, we could just throw caution to the wind and go, okay, well, we're going to draw down $120,000 or whatever it is, and or perhaps it's $100,000 and the rentals will cover our health insurance, whatever route we want to take. But I'd rather not. I think I'd rather be slightly more optimized than that.
Yes, as a true member of the FI community, optimize, right? Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I think we could spend an entire episode on just trying to navigate some of the challenges of walking through what drawdown really looks like. And of course, it's nuanced to every single person. It is not a one size fits all. Like you're talking about 72T, you're talking about rental income, you've got, holdings in retirement accounts, etc. Like there's lots of differences that aren't necessarily going to be there for everybody. Like myself, I don't have rental income, so it's much more straightforward. I have more money in a taxable account to align to what our projected spend is. And so, yeah, are we going to go the 72T route? Are we going to go the Roth conversion ladder account? I don't know. Still yet to be seen. So,
Sorry, go
lots of
ahead.
options.
Yeah, I do, and I do look at your portfolio from, in comparison to mine, and I don't know all the details, but just at a high level, I look at, okay, Elliot has one of two choices to make, and you can fall within that. Now, you guys are going to be moving to France, and those healthcare costs are not necessarily something that you're going to have to worry about in the foreseeable future. But I look at like just the straight and clean opportunities that you have. That's like, okay, well, I can just set up a 72T now. I can get whatever dollar amount you want, and if you get to a point where you want to give yourself a raise because you're going to be retiring at 40 years old and you're going to have 20 years until you're eligible to, withdraw without any kind of penalty, you can always open up another 72T and withdraw that way. Or like you said, you can do the Roth conversion ladder. So you have pretty much two options there that are relatively straightforward. And I've made my situation maybe a bit more complex than at this point in my life I would like it to be.
Sure. Complexity, but you have options, right?
True.
So, I mean, of course, you too can make this simple, Josh. You can sell all your real estate and drop it right into the market,
to my mind several times, and that's something else that I would like to learn more about is how that would affect from a capital gains standpoint and that sort of thing, what that would look like and what the types of strategies to explore, and at least just have that in my back pocket. Not to say that if I made that choice and it looked great and I'm going to go ahead and do that, but I would like to just know, like if I did this, if I sold one per year or two per year or whatever, this is the hit that I would have to take.
Right. Yep. Lots of options. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about during this one, or should we go ahead and wrap?
Well, we can either wrap, or I'm curious if there's anything new with you. Has there been any kind of progress towards the move that's probably going to be about what, 4 months, 5, 6 months away, something like that? 5 months away?
You're optimistic. Yeah, sure. I will say that yes, there have been progressions in different conversations with work and just generally things in life. So there's a lot of things going on. Knowing when we're actually going to move is, of course, probably the biggest one. That is partly born out of we have to be there by September 1st for the kids to, that's when the kids will start school. My parents have their 50th wedding anniversary coming up in August, so I'd like to be around for that. Aside from that, we're pretty much wide open. Our kids will end school here in May. We're going, you and I are going to Camp Fi in Colorado in July. I'd like to go to that. But aside from that, we don't have too many constraints that are just necessarily keeping us here. I would say the other piece of this puzzle, which has been fluid, I think is the best way of putting it, is whether or not I'll continue to work for my company as I move to France. So I have petitioned for my role to be remote as opposed to a hybrid role. In addition to that, inform them that I would be doing that remote role from France. And in addition to that, that it would be not from an office, right? There is an office location that is in France, but we do not intend to live close to where that office location is. So for those reasons, I was initially told no, that they will not approve that basically I'd roll to move to a remote position. Now, that is an ongoing conversation, so I don't know if that is the final say per se. So the other option that has been raised to me is to essentially apply to roles within our Europe office. So that my boss, my boss's boss, etc., would give me glowing reviews to say, yeah, hey, Elliot's a great worker. You would be lucky to have him, kind of thing. The only other piece of this that, of course, is the big thing has been our house. So we've been having discussions on whether we will sell or hold our house and for what period of time. So much like you, do I want to become a landlord with being an ocean away, or would I prefer to just sell, put the profits into the market and let the market do its thing?
Yeah. It's funny that I'm thinking through, just what we've talked about today and wondering if so options are great, but sometimes it can create some analysis paralysis. And I know I have struggled with that forever. Lori will call me out on that all the time. You think too much, you just do it, that kind of stuff. And, I'm curious, is that something that you would say about yourself as well? Or is it more so that you're with regard to just the house? Is it something that if it were up to you, would you just see a house, or is it more like just trying to make sure that it's something that you both agree on?
Sure. I think if it was solely my decision, we're not sponsored by Nike by any means, but I'm a just do it kind of person. Is that maybe to my detriment sometimes? Would I I may leap before I look, but I like to think that I weigh the pros and cons before I make a decision. But yeah, I would be leaning towards the sale side more than the rent side. Now, that's really complicated because we really like our neighbors, we really like our neighborhood, we like our location, our proximity to our family and friends. What happens if we go to France and we can't make friends and nobody likes us and we were totally ill prepared, we never learned French, any number of doomsday scenarios that one could spin up in their head. But what I think Dawn and myself have pondered more than anything else is what would be the scenario that would cause us to come back, and over what timeline would that be true? And would it have been beneficial to hold on to that piece of real estate for that possibility? And then what is the probability that that possibility actually comes true as well? So,
Ooh, that's a good question. The probability of the possibility.
yeah.
No, that's good for you. And I kind of assumed that about you, that you're more of a, you can make a decision pretty quickly and be okay with it after that. That's the other piece of it is like how comfortable you can be with that quick decision. And I'm more of the type of person that I agonize over the options and then second guess myself afterwards. So, uh, yeah, that would not be for me. I'm thankful that I'm not in your situation.
I certainly agonize over the decisions, but I think once I come to a conclusion, I try and be pretty swift in my action. Is that I may deliberate for quite a while internally, or if you're in my quote unquote inner circle, you probably hear about all the my trials and tribulations. But yeah, eventually there comes a point where I'm like, all right, it's time to make a decision. Let's go.
Just do it.
Yes, just do it.
All right, sir.
Yep. I think that puts a nice cap on it.
I agree.
I appreciate the time as always. And if you stuck with us, thanks so much. Give us a like or subscribe. Talk to you later.
Yep. See ya, Elliot.
See you, Josh.